This is Dish and Dirt with Gary Pickren, South Carolina's only podcast dedicated to the real estate agent craft. And now, the host of Dish and Dirt, Gary Pickren.
Greetings and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Dish and Dirt. I'm your office coordinator, really wrong host, Gary Pickren, coming to you from the beautiful downtown Columbia, South Carolina offices of Blair, Cato, Pickren, Castellan. This, the third week of May 2025. Big real estate news this week. South Carolina Realtors Association has released new compensation documents. Generally, I like what they did with these documents. The parts that I don't really love, I don't know that they had any other thing they could have done to make it any better. I think because of the settlement, I think they are just stuck with what they have to work with. But generally, I do like what they did. So today, our main part of our podcast, we are going to discuss the changes to the forms. And then additionally, will give you my analysis because that's what I like to do here at Dish and Dirt. And it's my show. So we're going to give you what I believe the changes are and how good they are. All right. After that, we're going to talk about a new finding by the Federal Reserve. We have a new study out that talks about the effect of buyer representation agreements to commissions. What you may not know is South Carolina was one of 15 states that actually did require buyer representation agreements even before the Sitzer-Burnett case. After Sitzer-Burnett, every state has to have a buyer representation agreement because you cannot get paid without a signed buyer representation agreement. But South Carolina was at the forefront leading in that realm. We were one of the first states to require buyer representation agreements. I know that's mind-blowing because we typically lead in things like illiteracy and ricket cases. But for once, we led something good. And so what we're going to talk about is what this study found in terms of commissions. Is this requirement of having a buyer representation agreement, is that going to push down commissions or not? We're also going to talk about an Axio study as well as a Redfin study as to whether or not real estate commissions have in fact gone up or down since the Sitzer-Burnett case was settled. Now, before we get started, there are two things I want to talk about. First, Sumter. As we mentioned last week, Blair Cato is going into Sumter. This will be our 9th office, and we're going to be in Hardy Cove Business Park. We're going to be right off Wilson Hall Road. Very excited about being in the community there. And this will be our 9th office, our 5th in the Midlands. We'll have Sumter, Camden, Lexington, Columbia, and Chapin in the Midlands, Myrtle Beach down at the coast, Spartanburg, Greenville, and Malden in the upstate. So this will be our 9th office. Very excited to be open. You're going to get the same quality service you've always gotten at our other Blair Cato offices, and you're also going to get the cool technology and the client experience that, quite frankly, I don't think has been in Sumter. So we're very excited to bring newness, that way of doing closings, that way of just making it very client-centric and making it feel less like a law firm. So we're very excited to bring that to you in Sumter. If you have a closing in Sumter, you're ready to close, you can email that to me at gary@blaircato.com or neworders@blaircato.com. Just put in the subject matter somewhere that you'd like to close this in Sumter. So we're very excited to be there. Now, the second thing I have to talk about is Dish and Dirt. I've got some amazing news to share with you all about Dish and Dirt. First, Dish and Dirt was named the #1 South Carolina real estate podcast by FeedSpot. That's right, the #1 podcast in the entire state of South Carolina dealing with real estate. Couldn't believe that. In fact, the same FeedSpot also named Dish and Dirt the #12 overall podcast for South Carolina. And that's behind the likes of things like Inside Gamecocks, Carolina Crimes, which got famous because of the Murdaugh case, Fitz News. So just to be even considered when you think about what all this state has in terms of history and sports and things of that nature, to be even that close to the top 10 is utterly amazing to me. Now, Dish and Dirt was also named the #1 podcast in South Carolina for real estate by Player FM. And lastly, but probably more mind-blowing to me, was that millionpodcast.com named Dish and Dirt #7 best realtor podcast in the country. Holy crap. I mean, there must be a complete lack of interesting podcasts for this podcast to somehow come in at #7. I don't know how the hell that happened. But nevertheless, big news. Dish and Dirt, #1 podcast, South Carolina real estate by 2 places, FeedSpot and Player FM, and #7 in the country for best realtor podcast. Couldn't be more honored. Only happened because of you guys listening and giving such support. So thank you guys for all the years of following Dish and Dirt and the 225 episodes I've done. Now that I've hurt myself, patting myself on the back as that great showman of the longest running American television anthology, Bugs Bunny, used to say, And now on with the show. This is it. So let's go ahead and get into our show. CR, as I mentioned, has released revised versions of several documents, including the Form 120 and the Form 130 and other documents that relate to Form 120 or 130, like 135 and 136. We're going to start with Form 120. As you know, prior to the Sitzer-Burnett settlement, we did not have to have a compensation agreement signed between agents on each transaction. And this was because compensation was handled through the multiple listing service. Your broker and the other broker had signed an agreement by being members of the MLS that when an offer was brought and accepted, that you would pay the commission that you've advertised and you couldn't change it. Well, after the Sitzer-Burnett case was settled, that went away. No longer could you advertise compensation on the MLS. So that brought in the requirement that you have a separate compensation agreement signed on every transaction. And so at that point, when the settlement went final, South Carolina Realtors Association was left scrambling with a very short period of time to try to find or create some type of compensation agreement that could be used in our community. And that's where Form 120 came in. Form 120 has been around for years. It was used as a for sale by owner document. This was a document that when you represented a buyer under an agreement and they wanted to see a for sale by owner by a seller, that you would take this document to the seller and the seller would agree to compensate you if in fact they signed a contract. That's how you got compensated in a for sale by owner. So SCR smartly took this document and said, hey, we have a short period of time to get something out. Let's go ahead and use this document we already have in our arsenal, and let's use this for compensation. And that's what's been used essentially since August 17th for compensation is the Form 120. For some reason, and I hadn't figured this out yet, some real estate agents still haven't figured out how to master Form 120. It seems to me, if I was getting paid through this one form, I would know this form frontwards and backwards and when to use it and when not to use it and who has to sign it. But here we are 8 months after the settlement, still arguing amongst ourselves as to who signs it, when you sign it, how it gets signed, and so forth. My favorite argument has been when a buyer agent demands a listing agent that is not doing broker to broker comp, they demand that listing agent sign the Form 120. And my response is, why the heck would they sign the Form 120? They're not paying you the compensation. The compensation would be coming from the seller. So why are they signing it? When you're not doing broker to broker compensation, there's nothing to offer you. If I represent a seller and I'm the listing agent and they've agreed to pay me X and me only X and not any compensation to be shared with the buyer's agent, why would I sign the compensation agreement? We continue to have this argument, and I don't know what it's going to take to get rid of it. Hopefully, this Form 120 will take care of that. To me, compensation's always been very simple, but we have overcomplicated it way beyond belief. And I don't know why everybody just thinks maybe it has to be more complicated than it is, that it can't be this simple, but it has been that simple, and it's very simple when you're doing broker to broker compensation, the traditional way of paying compensation, for lack of a better term. Then buyer's agent and the listing agent both sign the compensation agreement. Now, the brokers can sign it or the agent, but it's broker to broker comp. So the listing agent's the one who's paying it, and it's being paid directly to the buyer's agent's broker. On the other hand, if we're not doing broker to broker compensation, the EXP, the next home model, where the listing agent's only getting paid for selling the house and the services of listing, and the buyer's agent's getting paid directly by the buyer, then when there's a compensation agreement, a Form 120, that's going to be between the seller and the buyer's agent or the seller and the buyer. Well, luckily, SCR has tried to uncomplicate these things, tried to make it simpler. I think they've done a good job of it. And so we're going to walk our way through the Form 120. The biggest change that I think you're going to see here is that we don't have one Form 120, we have two Form 120s. And you should be able to figure this out. If you look at the top of the document, it clearly says at the top, listing broker to buyer broker. That is broker to broker compensation. So when the listing broker is paying broker to broker compensation, this is the Form 120 you're to use. Conversely, if the listing broker is not doing broker to broker compensation, you'll use the other Form 120. It's that simple, guys. It shouldn't be this hard to understand, but for some reason it is. So let's talk about the first one, broker to broker. Listing broker to buyer broker means broker to broker compensation. This is when you use it. Right off the bat, you should never send this document to an EXP agent or an ex-home agent. We know nationwide those two brokerages are not doing broker to broker comp. So if you send the Form 120 that says at the top of it, listing broker to buyer broker to an EXP agent or an ex-home agent, you are basically saying either I don't know what's going on with the marketplace or I have no idea what I'm doing, because we know without a shadow of a doubt, EXP and Next Home will under no circumstances do broker to broker compensation. So this is not the proper form when you are a buyer to send when a listing is being offered by an EXP agent or a Next Home agent. They are not paying broker to broker compensation. So don't send this over and don't look like you don't know what you're doing when you send it over. And that's what happens. Let's look at this document. This again is broker to broker compensation. Under paragraph 1, you can see the change here. Listing broker and buyer broker. You're putting the two brokers' names here because the listing broker is the one offering the compensation to the buyer broker agent. Still put the address for the buyer, and now you put the buyer's name as well. The terms section has changed as well. First of all, what's gone is the date when the agreement is no longer valid. What now replaces this is offers of compensation is binding only if the parties who they represent are under an executed and ratified contract within 30 days of the final signature of the agreement. Let me break that down to you. If y'all sign this agreement is good for 30 days, basically giving you a 30-day period to get the parties under the contract. If 30 days goes by and you haven't got the parties under the contract, then this agreement is essentially void. That doesn't mean that if we sign an agreement and we have this and it doesn't close for 30 or 45 or 50 days, that we got to get it re-signed or extended. It says that it's binding only if a contract is signed between the parties within 30 days. So you don't need to go update these if it takes 50 or 60 days to close. If it takes 50 to 60 days to get under a ratified contract, then you certainly would need to go update this agreement. Payment is also only made at closing unless otherwise in writing. Next, we look at paragraph 5, which is your compensation. You have a dollar, percentage, or other. Stayed the same. Payment is due in the event of seller default. Now, let me stop here and tell you why I do not like this section. In broker to broker compensation, the seller is going to pay the total commission to the listing agent, and then the listing agent is going to share part of that commission with the buyer's agent. In the event of seller default, this is saying that the commission is still due the buyer's agent from the listing agent, mind you, who also probably didn't get paid. So I'm not sure that I like this. I think this might want to be changed, stating that the commission is due from the seller in the event of a default by the seller, because otherwise it appears we're obligating our listing agent to pay it, because what could literally happen is a listing agent could be irate with their seller for not closing. But the seller says, I don't care, I'm going to default and take my chances. And now we've obligated the listing agent to pay the buyer's agent commission. Don't like that. Think that needs to be looked at. Also in this agreement is the agreement to arbitrate commission disputes. And the other key that I really like about this agreement is the signature lines. It clearly shows the listing agent signs and the buyer agent signs. No, the buyer and the seller do not sign this agreement when it's broker to broker compensation. It's signed by the listing agent who has the commission, who is sharing it with the buyer's agent. That's why it's broker to broker comp, and that's why only the two agents or the brokers sign this particular Form 120. Overall, I like everything they've done here. My only question or concern is payment being due in the event of seller default. Is that going to obligate a listing agent to pay a buyer's agent when it's the seller defaulting and not the agent? Now let's look at our second Form 120. Essentially the exact same document. However, it says seller to buyer broker. This is clearly showing you this is not broker to broker compensation. This would be the contract you would use, or the Form 120 you would use when you're dealing with a listing agent who's at EXP or Next Home. They do not pay broker to broker compensation under any circumstances. So this is the form that you would use. This is saying the seller is agreeing to pay the buyer broker's commission. On this form, the parties are listed at the top as seller and buyer. It's very simple. No listing agent, because listing agent has nothing to offer you. Nowhere on this document will you see the listing agent signing it or his name or anything, because the listing agent is getting paid by the seller for listing the property, but they have nothing to offer the buyer's agent. My hope for all of you is in the future, this is how it is always done, that we aren't doing broker to broker comp, because again, I think broker comp is going to lead us to the next lawsuit. Under terms and compensation, it's identical to the other Form 120. It also contains payment is due in the event of seller default. I'm perfectly okay with this because, again, this contract is between the seller and the buyer broker. So in this particular instance, if the seller defaults, the seller has made the decision to default, and the seller was the one who was promising to pay the commission. So yes, the seller should pay this in a seller default. I don't like it in the other one. I think it's perfectly fine here. My thoughts are, it's unfortunate that we even need to go this route because I don't understand how agents couldn't understand the other Form 120. Also, unfortunate we're still having to use this because we're still doing broker to broker. I'm happy to see XP, Next Home, and some of the smaller brokerages in town have gotten away from broker to broker comp. I'm hoping we'll get rid of broker to broker comp altogether. But I also want to applaud South Carolina Realtors Association for recognizing that agents were struggling to figure these things out and for going in there and making the changes and making it better. I like everything that's changed here. My only concern, again, would be going back to the broker to broker compensation agreement Form 120. And while it says that the commission is due upon seller default, I think it needs to be clarified from the seller and not from the listing agent. If I was the listing agent, I would probably be marking that section out and not obligating me to pay the buyer's agent if my seller defaults. That's something I would definitely look at crossing out. Now, on to Form 130, 135, and 136. I'm only going to talk about Form 130 because the other changes are consistent with the changes of Form 130. This, of course, is your exclusive right to buy document, buyer agreement. The first change you'll see there is in paragraph 3, outstanding change. It can only be terminated if broker and buyer sign a release. No unilateral right to terminate by either party. We've been talking about this on this show for several months now, this belief that a contract, which is what this is, can be just terminated by one of the parties. It's not a unilateral agreement. It is a bilateral agreement. It takes both parties to terminate. And so let me remind you of your obligation as it relates to agency. When a buyer says, yeah, I was under an agreement, but I fired that agent, that is not true. Now, they may have gotten a mutual release from that agent, but they certainly didn't fire that agent in this representation. It is your duty, according to the South Carolina Real Estate Commission, to confirm that the release was bilateral and not unilateral. So when you are talking to a prospective client and that consumer tells you, well, I was working with such and such agent, but I terminated that agreement, you have a duty to call that agent and find out if, in fact, that was terminated. The buyer or seller have no unilateral right to terminate this agreement. I don't know why this has come up in our industry, and maybe I guess it is some of the advertising, some of we used to do back in the 80s and 90s. I'll let you out of the agreement, but that was a let out of the agreement. That isn't a unilateral right. It's never been in there as far as I can remember, and it's certainly not in there now that either party can just terminate without obligations to the others. It's very important to understand your requirements under the statute, not to interfere with agency. And I love this statement because I think it really goes right to the heart of the matter. There's no unilateral right to terminate the agreement by either party. It has to be agreed upon by both. Now let's look under the compensation section. They removed the very confusing part of a percentage of another calculated by blank. I think what that really was originally in there for was that if we were going to pay you some other way other than a percentage or a set dollar fee, then you would use it here. And I think it probably had something to do with new builders. We're going to pay it based on the base price, but not the add-ons. What I'm not really excited about was that they did remove the admin fee, but kept in the retainer fee. Admin fee and retainer fees are two different things. An admin fee is I'm charging you an administrative cost for working on your file. The retainer fee is you're paying me some type of payment up front that either I get to keep or I don't, which just kind of secures my services. And usually it's I get paid that if you don't buy a house. I haven't talked to Austin about this as to why they went this route, and I'd be very interested to hear. Austin did do a wonderful video on their website for SCR, and it doesn't talk about why they did get rid of the administrative fee. I know it was very burdensome and confusing filling out that part, but there are a lot of brokerages out there that charge an admin fee. There's a lot of teams that charge an admin fee, and that fee has to be disclosed in the buyer representation agreement, or you can't charge it. So I would rather them had moved the retainer fee and kept the admin fee here. So you guys are using this form are going to have to somehow figure out how to put this admin fee back in there. Now, another section they put in here, and I don't really like, but I don't know that they had any choice, is the bonus section. I have opined on this show that bonuses are essentially dead. You shouldn't take those. Um, there's as many opinions on whether or not you can take a bonus as there are flavors of Mountain Dew. Apparently, there's like 6 billion flavors of Mountain Dew now. But it's a hard thing to determine whether or not you should take bonuses. I don't think you should, but the change here says buyer allows broker to accept bonus offered and paid by seller or listing broker of blank % of the gross purchase price or dollar amount. The problem I have is by statute, you have to disclose this. And it's got to be, and you can't disclose something you don't know, right? It's how do you disclose something before you have the information? Because that's to be informed consent. When you get paid by two parties, you have to have informed consent. And I don't know how you have informed consent at this point. So I don't like it on a statutory basis. But what it says, if there's no bonus that was paid, then this section doesn't apply. I don't blame SEC for this issue. I think this is just a bad issue we have overall. But Austin in his video does cover some very good points. First of all, if you don't have a bonus written in this agreement up front before you go to represent them, then you can't get a bonus. You can't go back and add a bonus later. Even if you use this and put a dollar amount, let's say you put $1,000 in here, you can't then go back and amend it to try to get $2,000 because the bonus was bigger than you thought. It's not an up to number either. It has to be a definite number. It can't be bonus up to $5,000 or up to $10,000. It has to be a definitive number. And as Austin says, you can't amend not only bonuses, but commission rates to go get more commission unless you've done more work. And more work doesn't mean it took longer, it was harder. It means you've added more services. My opinion is I'd stay the hell away from it. I don't think you should be taking any bonuses. I think you have a fiduciary duty to your client. And so the question I would have under fiduciary duty is, what did you do to get that additional bonus other than show the house? And that brings in all the questions about steering. And that's one of the main questions or complaints that Catchmark had, was that you're steering people based on commission rates or based on bonuses. And so it just looks very difficult to me to make the argument that when you're putting in here that you can get paid bonus up to $1,000, and lo and behold, you find a house that has $1,000 bonus, how are you going to make that argument that you didn't steer? And when you look at it on a fiduciary duty basis, doesn't that $1,000 discount really belong to your client? I mean, they're giving you $1,000. You've already agreed to represent them for a set fee or a percentage. So why would you get this bonus? I don't understand why that wouldn't just go back to your client in terms of reductions. I don't like this at all. I would not accept a bonus. Again, I do not blame SCR for putting it in here. I think they did the best they could. A lot of people don't think that bonuses are a problem. And I know they have lots of members probably telling them they want to put the bonus in the agreement so they can get paid. I think you're a fool, in my opinion, to accept a bonus. And I think you're a fool to write it into an agreement that I don't even know there's a bonus out there, but if there is one, I'm going to get paid. I think that just goes completely against your fiduciary duties. Now, moving on to paragraph 8, they included a statement about multiple offers. I'm not sure why this was an important thing that they wanted to add, but this is reminding you about the multiple offer form. Paragraph 12, they shortened the broker liability. In fact, they shortened the whole agreement down to 3 pages. Overall, I love it when you shorten agreements because these things have gotten to be just so ridiculously long. Overall, as I said, very pleased with Form 130. I think it's great that they have changed it. I still think there could have been some other things we could have done in here with the bonuses. I probably wouldn't have put it in there. I would have actually liked to have seen maybe some options for new construction or acreage where I could put my fee for a resale as blank, my fee for new construction is blank, my fee for acreage is blank. That way, if you have a client that has been signed up to go look at resale houses and now all of a sudden they want to look at land and building on the land, it's a lot more work and it should be a different fee. But I would argue, I guess, that you could go back and revise your commission structure on that because that is a different service. All right, that's where we are on the forms. Applaud SCR for getting these done. Very happy. Hopefully this will get rid of some of the confusion as to who signs. Again, not sure why there was any confusion in the first place. So on to our second topic. Since the settlement, we know that house prices have basically plummeted. We know that commissions essentially have been cut in half. We know that there are a tremendous amount of new compensation models that have emerged and that commission rates now vary on every single closing all across the country. Oh, wait a minute, none of that happened. That didn't happen at all. But that's what Catchmark promised. And as Gomer Pyle used to say, surprise, surprise. Yes, I know that's just dated me. I didn't watch Gomer Pyle when the original episodes came out in the 60s. I watched them as a kid in the late 70s, the reruns. I didn't date myself that much. But none of that happened. Not one bit of that happened, just like Ketchmark said it would. And I don't know why that's a surprise to anybody that lawyers are overstating and exaggerating, but whatever. So let's look at the analysis here. A report called Commissions and Admissions Trend in Real Estate Broker Compensation. They examined commission rates advertised to buyer agents in a data set of real estate listings from CoreLogics from 1995 to 2023, which is all before the settlement. And what they did is they looked at the house price index and average resale price based on the market trends to see if there was any relationship, any correlation between commissions and home prices. And what they found out is buyer representation agreements that, as we know, lay out buyer and agent responsibilities were in 15 states before the settlement. Now they're in all 50. But the authors found out that the commission rates have come down a bit nationally over the past 2 decades from an average of about 3% in the late 1990s to about 2.7% in 2023, which is contrary to what Ketchmark said. Ketchmark said they were set at 3% or 6%, and they were set there and they never changed. That obviously was not true. They still say the high bar is at percent. So imagine that the vast majority or almost everybody still at 3, not going over, but suggesting the industry norm of 6% total commission paid to buyer sellers actually is not true. It wasn't true at all. And what they learned was when house prices are higher relative to consumer prices or prevailing incomes, real estate agents were more willing to move to a lower commission rate since the higher selling price offset that lower rate. Interestingly, what they found was no material or statistical significant effects of buyer representation agreement requirements on advertised commission rates, suggesting that the changes in these policies didn't have a material effect. Wow. One of the main requirements of the settlement for Sitzer-Burnett was everybody had to have a buyer representation agreement, which I'm all for. You should have that. But they made the argument that it would reduce the buyer commission rates. Well, their analysis of the 15 states that implemented it, it didn't really do that. So there's no way that these other 35 now implement it will have any effect overall either. Furthermore, Axis came out with I guess you would call it a report. It's kind of a hack of a website. I don't know why people even listen to Axios, but what the headline was why broker fees have barely changed since the big settlement. What they say, people are buying and selling homes mostly the same way, with sellers covering the buyer agent fees. Wow, who would have thought that? According to Axios, average commissions dipped from 5.64. Again, remember, Ketchmark said they were locked in at 6, but here we're finding from 5.64 to 4.96 in the months immediately following the settlement. But all that's changed now. And so let's look at the new Redfin study, because they now have bounced right back to where they were prior to the settlement. According to Redfin, buyers agents earned on average of 2.4% in commission in the first quarter. That's slightly up from the new NAR rules that took effect in August. But let's break it down. Broken down by price, homes that sold for $1 million or more in the first quarter, the average buyer agent commission was 2.17%. That's unchanged from the prior quarter, but down from 2.2% in the third quarter when the new rule took effect, and down from 2.3% a year earlier. So think about that. They were not at 3% as Ketchmark tried to claim. They were actually at 2.3 a year ago, which was prior to settlement. They dropped now to 2.17. Very minute change, but these are on $1 million houses. So good job, Ketchmark. You saved rich people some money. Very good. Because let's look at the next part. For homes that sold between $500,000 and $1 million, the average buyer agent commission was 2.29%, which is up from 2.26% from the prior quarter and 2.27% in the third quarter of 2024, but it's down from 2.34 from a year earlier. So if you have a house from $500,000 to $1 million, before the settlement, your average was 2.34% commission for the buyer agent, and now it's 2.29. Very minimal, 0.05% change. So no big relief there. But again, Ketchmark would have you believe it's 3%, but it was 2.34%. Now, for homes that are less than $500,000, commission was 2.49%, up from 2.46% in the prior quarter, 2.42% in the third quarter of 2024, and 2.48% a year earlier. So check this out. I love this. Before the settlement, houses that were under $500,000, the average commission wasn't 3%, as Catchmark told the court, but 2.48%. Today, they're 2.49. So for the average Joe selling houses from $0 to $500,000, commissions have gone up. For rich people selling $1 million houses, commission has gone down. Applause for Michael Catchmark. You are a absolute man of the people. Congratulations. You got your $700 million and you screwed the average person and you helped out the rich guy. Love you, Michael Catchmark. You're a great guy. All right. That, my friends, is our report for today. I hope everybody enjoyed Dish and Dirt. And again, thank you all for making us the #1 podcast for real estate in South Carolina, the #7 podcast in the nation for realtors. Y'all have a wonderful weekend. Come back and see us again next week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Take care.